The difference between vertical farms and greenhouses is not what you think. In today's video, going to take a look at some major differences and similarities between these two popular indoor farming methods. Let's get into it. What are the main differences between vertical farming and greenhouses? The first thing that comes to mind when comparing these two farming methods is definitely the structure. Traditional greenhouses have large, single spans of glass that allow natural light to penetrate deep into the structure. Vertical farms, on the other hand, use artificial lighting that is powered by electricity. And this difference in structure alone has huge implications for how plants grow and the types of crops that can be produced in each environment. Greenhouses often have a single layer of plants with aisles running between them so workers can access the crops. On the other hand, vertical farms can have multiple layers of plants with the bottom layers being accessed via conveyor belts or other automated systems. This allows for more efficient use of space since you can grow upwards rather than outwards like you do in a greenhouse. Another important difference between vertical farms and greenhouses is the way that water and nutrients are delivered to the plants. Greenhouses typically use drip irrigation or flood and drain tables, while vertical farms usually employ a hydroponic or an aeroponic system. These methods allow for more precise control over the amount of water and nutrients that each plant receives, which can lead to higher yields. Greenhouses rely on natural processes like pollination, which can lead to lower yields when compared to vertical farms. Vertical farms rely on controlled environments where temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide levels are carefully regulated, allowing farmers to optimize conditions for maximum growth. Additionally, vertical farms often use beneficial insects or even bumblebees to pollinate crops, so there is no decline in yield due to poor weather or other environmental factors. When it comes to pests and diseases, greenhouses are more susceptible to issues because they're exposed to the outside environment. However, many greenhouse operators have found ways to mitigate these risks, such as using beneficial insects to control pests and diseases, or even growing crops in a raised bed to avoid problems with soil-borne diseases. Vertical farms are generally more protected from pests and diseases because they are not exposed to the outside environment. This allows farmers to focus on growing crops without having to worry about potential problems from the outside world. A big difference between vertical farms and greenhouses is the level of technology required to operate each system. Greenhouses typically require less technology since they rely on natural processes like photosynthesis and natural climate cycles. They may use simple technologies like automated watering systems or heating and cooling systems to maintain optimal growing conditions. However, vertical farms require a high level of technology to maintain optimal growing conditions, including advanced lighting systems, sensors to monitor environmental conditions, and automated climate controls. So let us talk about the cost of building a greenhouse versus the cost of building a vertical farm. It really depends on the size and complexity of the structure, as well as the materials used in construction. Generally speaking though, greenhouses tend to be less expensive to build because they do require as much technology or specialized equipment as vertical farms do. A small backyard greenhouse could cost just a few $100s, while larger commercial greenhouses can cost tens of thousands. On the other hand, vertical farms tend to be more expensive to build up front because of the costs associated with technology and automation. However, the long-term costs associated with running a vertical farm may be lower because of increased efficiency and automation. In terms of land use, greenhouses typically use more land per unit of production than vertical farms. This is because greenhouses need room for the structure itself as well as for aisles and other working areas. Vertical farms, on the other hand, use less land per unit of production, since they grow upwards instead of outwards. This makes them ideal for urban areas where land is limited. The type of crops grown is another major difference between vertical farms and greenhouses. As we mentioned earlier, greenhouses typically grow crops that require a lot of sunlight and warmth, such as tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. They can also grow leafy greens and herbs. But in general, the crops grown in greenhouses are typically those that would grow well in a warm climate outdoors. On the other hand, vertical farms can grow a wider variety of crops because they have more control over the environment. They can mimic the conditions needed for certain crops to thrive, regardless of the climate outside. For example, vertical farms are often used to grow leafy greens, herbs, strawberries, and even flowers. This flexibility allows farmers to diversify their crops and produce crops that would unnormally be able to be grown in the area. One of the biggest advantages of vertical farming is its ability to grow crops year-round, regardless of the weather outside. This is because the environment inside a vertical farm is controlled, meaning that farmers can mimic the conditions necessary for certain crops to grow regardless of the season. This allows for continuous production and a steady supply of fresh, local produce to consumers. So what are the pros and cons of vertical farming in greenhouses? Well, let's start with vertical farming. One of the main advantages of vertical farming is that it uses less land than traditional agriculture. This is because vertical farms grow crops in stacked layers, which allows farmers to grow more food in a smaller space. Another advantage of vertical farming is that it can be done in urban areas, which allows for the production of fresh, local food in cities. This can help reduce transportation costs and the carbon footprint of food production. However, vertical farming is not without its drawbacks. One of the main disadvantages is that it requires a lot of energy to power the lights and climate controls. This can result in high operating costs, especially if energy prices fluctuate. Now let's take a look at greenhouses. One of the main advantages of greenhouses is that they allow farmers to grow crops year-round regardless of the weather outside. This is because greenhouses provide a controlled environment that allows farmers to mimic the conditions necessary for certain crops to grow. Another advantage of greenhouses is that they typically require less technology and automation than vertical farms, which can result in lower operating costs. However, greenhouses also have their own set of disadvantages. One of the main disadvantages is that they use more land per unit of production than vertical farms. This is because greenhouses need room for the structure itself as well as for aisles and other working areas. So which is better, vertical farming or greenhouses? Ultimately, the best choice will depend on a variety of factors, including the type of crops grown, the budget, and the goals of the farmer. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. If you want to grow crops that require a lot of sunlight and warmth, such as tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, then a greenhouse may be the best option. However, if you want to grow a wider variety of crops, or if you're re-looking for a more sustainable and energy-efficient option, then vertical farming may be the better choice. One trend that we're seeing in the industry is the use of vertical farming techniques within greenhouses. This allows farmers to take advantage of the benefits of both systems. For example, some greenhouse operators are installing vertical farming systems within their greenhouses to grow leafy greens and other crops that require less sunlight. This allows them to diversify their crops and produce more food in the same amount of space. As the demand for fresh, local produce continues to grow, we're likely to see more innovation in the agriculture industry. As farmers look for new ways to meet consumer demand, whether vertical farming, greenhouses, or a combination of the two, the future of farming is bright. If you enjoyed this video, check out our previous videos where we go into detail about vertical farming and greenhouses individually. We have lots of great information there. We hope you learned something new today, and we'll see you next time.